Is Ansel Adams' famous zone system still useful for digital photography? Let's talk about it on today's episode of
Ask David Bergman.
Hey there everybody, welcome back. Here I am, as always, answering your photography questions right here on Adorama TV. Today's question comes from Michael C, and he wants to know, David, can we apply Ansel Adams' zone system in digital photography? Is it still practical? So I actually met Michael recently at a photo event, and he told me he uses the zone system in his work, but he wasn't sure if there was still any use for it with digital cameras. I told him to send his question into the show, and I'd address it on a future episode, and well, here we are. So today, let's talk about what the zone system is and see if it still has value in today's digital world. Let's start out with a little history. The zone system was developed by Ansel Adams along with fellow photographer Fred Archer while they were teaching at the Art Center School in Los Angeles around 1939 or 1940. Now, Adams was always quick to point out that it really wasn't his invention, but we do tend to associate it with his name. He called it a codification of the principles of sensitometry. All that really means is they took existing science about how film responds to light and they turned it into practical advice photographers could actually use. Now, the system covers everything, including the camera, the negative, and the print. What it does is divide brightness into 11 zones numbered 0 through 10 and written as Roman numerals so they wouldn't get confused with other camera settings. Zone 0 is pure black with no detail at all, and Zone 10 is pure white, also with no detail. Zone 5 sits right in the middle and can be called, obviously, middle gray. Now, it can also be referred to as 18% gray. The reason is, back in the film days, meter manufacturers needed an absolute reference point for average brightness so that meters could be calibrated. They decided on a card that reflects 18% of the light hitting it, which looks like the middle brightness between true black and true white. Now, the point of a light meter is to translate the brightness of a scene into numbers. When you compare the number values in different parts of a scene, it can give you a pretty good idea of how bright or dark each section is relative to everything else. And by the way, none of what a traditional light meter measures has anything to do with color. We're only talking about defining brightness by seeing how much light is being reflected back. If you point a meter at, let's say, a bright red apple and a medium gray rock that happen to both reflect the same amount of light back, you're going to get the same exact meter reading off of both. Now, there are different kinds of light meters, but the most common one is built into almost every modern film or digital camera, like one that you probably have. By default, your camera's metering mode is set to something like evaluative or center weighted. That looks at wide areas of the scene and averages out all of the brightness values. But for the zone system, you really should be using the spot metering mode. That tells your camera meter to only look at a very small section depending on where you place the small dot in your scene. What happens next really depends on your shooting mode. If you're in full manual, meaning you've set aperture, shutter speed, and ISO yourself, the meter, which you can see in your viewfinder, shows you how far off that spot is from 18% gray. It can be plus or minus however many stops, and nothing changes automatically. It's up to you to adjust your exposure settings, which will then move that reading as you make those adjustments. But if you're in any kind of an auto mode like aperture priority, shutter priority, auto ISO, or full program, the camera is going to automatically adjust whatever setting you didn't lock in to make that meter reading land on 18% gray. In aperture priority, for example, you set your ISO and your aperture, and the camera picks a shutter speed to make whatever is under your spot become 18% gray. So, if you point that spot meter at bright white snow, it'll give you a setting that would turn the snow gray. If you point it at a black cat, it'll give you also a setting that would turn that cat the same gray also. The meter has no idea it's looking at snow or a cat. It's just doing the math to make whatever it's pointed at become that middle gray color. So, not color, middle gray brightness, I should say. Now, besides the meter built into your camera, there are separate handheld meters that you can buy. The most common type are called incident meters. Those measure the light hitting the scene, not what's bouncing off your subject. So they can't tell you the brightness value of any specific tone in your frame. For the zone system, we really want to know how much light is being reflected back because that changes based on how reflective the subject actually is. The white snow and the black cat bounce very different amounts of light, even under identical lighting conditions. Now, some high-end incident meters do have a reflective spot meter option, and there are standalone spot meters you can buy too, but they're not really used that much anymore since we have spot meters built into our cameras. So, each one of Adams' zones from 0 to 10 represents double or half the amount of light from the zone next to it, which also equates to one stop of light in either direction. And what Adams figured out was that you could meter a specific part of your scene, decide which zone you actually wanted that tone to be in, and then set your exposure settings to place it there on purpose. Everything else in the scene would then fall into its own zone relative to that choice. Adams sometimes called this concept place and fall. You place one tone exactly where you want it, and then you let the rest of the scene fall naturally around it. So let's get back to our snow example. You probably don't want the snow to be in zone 10, which is blown out pure white with no detail. If you print that image, the snow wouldn't put any ink down on the paper. You probably want to be at zone 9 or 8. Zone 8 is 3 stops above zone 5, which is that middle gray. So you should adjust your exposure settings so that your meter reading on the snow is 3 stops over that middle gray. Then everything else is going to fall into place. Now, skin tones usually look the most natural in zones 5 to 7, depending on whether it's light or dark skin. So set your exposures so that the spot reading on your subject's skin is in that range, and everything else will just fall into place for the brightness that it is. The idea for Adams was to have a near perfect negative so that no portion of the image was too far under or overexposed. Then in the darkroom, he could continue to manipulate his images even more to put each tone exactly where he wanted it. It's also worth noting that he was shooting individual sheets of large format film, which meant that he could develop each negative differently. If a scene had really low contrast, Adams could increase development time to expand the tonal range and make that negative more contrasty. And if a scene was too contrasty, he could cut it down by shortening that development process, and that would make the negative, less contrasty. Photographers shooting roll film never really had that luxury because the entire roll is developed together all at once the same way. It's kind of funny because today in the digital age, we're right back to being able to process every single frame completely differently if we want to, just no chemistry required now. Hey, quick sidebar, if you've got a photography question you want me to answer, you know what to do. You just go to askdavidbergman.com and submit it right there on the site. If you want to keep up with everything I'm doing, thedavidbergman.com has links to my socials, my free email list, a ton of educational videos like this one, and a few discount and affiliate links. And if you're enjoying this video, please hit like, subscribe to Adorama's YouTube channel, and go ahead and tap that bell for notifications. It really helps us keep making free photography content for you every single week. Okay, so let's get back to Michael's question. Can we still use the zone system with today's digital photography? Sure, it's really not much different than what Adams was doing because it's just about creative control. Instead of just accepting whatever the camera meter tells you, you decide how bright or dark you want your images to be. I've been preaching this for years, and it's why I always say it's best to shoot in full manual exposure. If you want your image to be brighter than middle gray, you open up. If you want it to be darker, you close down. That's placing a tone on a zone just like Adams did, except now you get to check your results instantly instead of waiting for film to come back from the lab. Now, the zone system wasn't only about nailing exposure at the moment of capture. Adams was just as meticulous, maybe even more so, in the darkroom afterward, as I said. He'd dodge and burn his prints, holding back light from some areas and giving extra exposure to others. That would push specific tones into exactly the zones that he wanted in the final print. One of his most famous images, Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico, is a perfect example of this. Adams reprinted that single negative more than 1,300 times over his career, and the sky kept getting darker and the contrast kept getting stronger as his interpretation evolved over the decades. The same negative, the same original exposure, completely different final prints depending on how he used the darkroom. Today, of course, we tend to work in the digital darkroom. Software like DxO's Nik Silver Effects Pro will show you where the different tones of your image fall from 0 to 10. That's the program I've been using to convert my images to black and white for many years now. Check in the description, by the way, for a coupon code down below. But no matter what software you use, if you want a contrasty photo, just adjust your settings to use as many zones as possible. If you want less contrast, use fewer zones. And of course, you can use localized tools to dodge and burn parts of the image and change the tones in any particular area. That's essentially you making the same kind of decisions Adams made in the darkroom. We're just using sliders instead of an enlarger and a set of glass filters and cardboard cutouts. I've actually been using the zone system for years and kind of didn't even realize it. When I photograph concerts, I'm setting all 3 exposure triangle settings manually in real time. Since I can see the exposure in my viewfinder as the light changes or I change my settings, I can decide how bright or dark I want my images to be. For me, if there's a person in the frame, I use them as my guide because I usually consider them to be the most important part of the image. I want to see my subject's face and their expression without it being too under or overexposed. Just like Ansel Adams, just like his place and fall concept, I put the skin tone of my subject's face right around zone 5. Now, of course, I'm just eyeballing it in real time, but I've been doing this for a lot of years now, and I have a pretty good idea of what that looks like. The result is that even with all the colorful stage lights dancing around my subject, as long as I've got the face at the right brightness, everything else just falls wherever it is. If the background is bright red, it's going to be bright red. If it's pitch black, it's going to be pitch black. The face is the most important part of the image to me. That's really the zone system at work in a modern context. While we've got some great new tools today, a system that was developed almost 90 years ago can still help us to create dynamic images that really stand out. So, what do you all think? Do you still use the zone system in any way? Did you have any idea what all of this was about? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're here, go check out a video I did last year about the difference between luminance and RGB histograms. It's a good overview of how exposure tools work, so click the link on screen to check that out. Thanks so much for watching Adorama TV. I'll see you next time right here on Ask David Bergman.